Public Relations and there we go. I'm Ann Briggs. I'm the Public Relations and Engagement Coordinator for the Nebraska Water Center. And we're so excited to have you here tonight for the third installment of our webinar series with Conservation Nebraska. So tonight we're going to have Dave Aiken as our speaker. He's a native Nebraskan. Dave graduated from Hastings College and received his law degree from George Washington University in 1975. After law school, Dave joined the University of Nebraska Department of Agricultural Economics, where he has worked on many issues relating to Nebraska water rights and agricultural law. Currently, Dave teaches undergraduate courses in agricultural law and in environmental and natural resources law. So tonight we're scheduled to continue our series on water issues in Nebraska. If you tuned in a few months ago, I gave you an overview about lots of different things. But we talked a little bit about how Nebraska faces both flooding and drought. So tonight, Dave's going to share some of the specific impacts of water quantity issues that we have all across the state. And this includes issues along the South Platte River, nitrate in groundwater, and climate change impacts on water in Nebraska. And we'll also save some time at the end of the presentation for questions. So for the viewers, if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A or the chat throughout, and we'll answer them at the end. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dave. Dave, thank you for joining us tonight. We're excited to hear what you have to share.
Okay, thanks very much. It's I'm happy to be here, and as soon as we get that look all right.
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, the first thing I'm going to hit is the South Platte River. And here's a map that shows the Platte River system, the North Platte, basically out of Wyoming, coming from Wyoming into Nebraska, and then the South Platte coming into Nebraska from Colorado. And on the South Platte side, you see the river, it's blue, and then you see this little black line. And that black line is very important with regards to the compact. So when we're talking about the compact, remember that little black line, and that, roughly 3/4 of the South Platte River is, to the left of that black line. And then the 25% includes the part of the river that comes into Nebraska, and that's on the right-hand side of that little black line. And the left-hand one, starts up in the Rocky Mountains and flows down. And so that's the upstream part. And then there's the downstream, which is the part that comes into Nebraska. Okay. Now, you all may remember that roughly a year ago, our governor announced a request for $500 million to build the build the Perkins County Canal on the South Platte River. And this was in response to proposed water developments in Colorado, which would likely reduce water flows from the South Platte River into Nebraska. And we have a compact with Colorado on the South Platte River, and it divides the South Platte into the upper section and the lower section. And the upper section is, the one that comes out of the mountains. It's the long one that's about 3/4 of the river, give or take. And I call that the Denver section because Denver is where it starts. Then the lower section is the smaller section that flows into Nebraska, and that is I call that the Nebraska section. And that's just my own terminology. But under the compact, Nebraska has no water rights in the upper section of the South Platte River. And that's really important because all of the activity that's going on is upstream of that dividing line between the upper reach and the lower reach. And so, legally we're in kind of a challenging position because under the compact, it says we don't have any water rights Colorado can basically do what it wants in the upper reach of the river, and it's just subject to the compact regarding Nebraska on the lower reach. So that's, you know, we've got kind of a problem there. Okay, the compact was approved and I think went into effect in 1923. And the background is that in southwestern Nebraska, there's a canal called the Western Canal, which comes out of the South Platte River. And it provides water to irrigators both in Colorado, but mostly to irrigators in Nebraska. And the Western Canal has a water right in Colorado. However, and it's a water right for 100 cubic CFS during the irrigation season. However, when the cubic feet per second, that's about, well, it's a nice appropriation in terms of water needs. So lots of farmers in Nebraska and Colorado rely on that water. The problem was that, you know, when Western Canal was not getting its 120 CFS, the Western Canal folks would contact the state engineer in Colorado, which is what you're supposed to do, and say, you know, we're the senior appropriator and we're not getting our water. So can you please shut off some of the junior appropriators that are diverting the water upstream from us so that there's more water that gets to our turnout so that we can, you know, so that we can get our 120 cubic feet per second. And Colorado said, no thanks, because they would have to shut down Colorado irrigators, basically to benefit irrigators in Nebraska. So they were just kind of playing politics. And so Nebraska said, fine, we'll see you in court. But, and then when Nebraska filed the lawsuit, you know, Colorado said, well, you know, we don't really want a lawsuit, you know, and there's some way that we can work this out just between us, you know, which is kind of what Nebraska wanted in the first place. So they negotiated, so they agreed to develop a compact. And, you know, that's where one of the things that Colorado wanted was that they would, you know, that the upper section would not be what Nebraska would have no claims to the water rights in the upper section, but, you know, just in that lower 25% of the river. And that was the big thing that Colorado wanted. The Nebraska got what it wanted in the sense that Colorado said, yes, when the Western Canal isn't getting its 120 CFS, we will regulate the upstream junior appropriators whose water rights are newer than the Western Canal water rights. And so they're junior and the Western Canal is senior because they're older. We'll regulate the junior irrigators upstream from the Western Canal so that during the irrigation season, the Western Canal gets its 120 cubic feet per second. In addition, Nebraska negotiated something else. We were building the Perkins, at that time, we were building the Perkins County Canal, and Colorado said, fine, we will put in the compact that, you know, once the Perkins County Canal is built, that it can divert up to 500 CFS during the off season. That would be the fall and the winter, and maybe the spring, you know, October to April, I think, something like that. But, you know, when the irrigation season starts, then, you know, the Perkins County Canal doesn't get anything, but in the off season, they get that 500 CFS, which is a lot. You know, I mean, that's a pretty good water rate. And the idea was probably going to be stored in Nebraska and then used for irrigation in the summer. Now, fast forward to 2002, and this was the beginning of a drought in Colorado, both on the eastern and western side of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. And of course, the whole Colorado River Basin, which flows all the way down to California, you know, this drought is not just in Colorado, but it's the entire Colorado River Basin, and then some. But but that's, that part of the country has been in trouble, because they're having this really, really bad drought. And in 2004, just to show how bad things were in Colorado, or are in Colorado, 4,000 and some irrigation wells in the South Platte Basin were shut down because they didn't have water to make up for any stream depletion effects that their pumping would cause to the stream. So that's, 4,000 irrigation wells is a lot. It's especially a lot in the South Platte River Basin. If anybody shut down 4,000 wells in Nebraska, that would be front page news for months. So it's a pretty big deal. Long story short, Colorado has been wrestling with, is this drought ever going to stop? And, California is being flooded. So some of the drought is over for California, and that their reservoirs are probably all going to be full or close to full, when it stops raining and snowing. But the groundwater, that doesn't affect the groundwater very much, but we haven't had that kind of precipitation here in the plains. So they've had this almost 20-year drought in Colorado. And so they've been looking at, what can we do? What can we do to try to increase our water supplies to deal with things like this long-term drought? And so they've gone through a lot of planning processes where they've been looking at maybe we can build some dams, or maybe there's some other things that we can do to try to store water, keep water in Colorado so that we have more to use ourselves. And quite a bit of activity in that regard. Big study that impacts Nebraska, potentially impacts Nebraska, was one that the Colorado legislature authorized in 2017. And the charge to the engineering group doing the study was, we want an estimate of how much water is flowing into Nebraska each year that we are not required to let Nebraska have under the South Platte Compact. And under the South Platte Compact, all we're entitled to is 120 cubic feet per second to the Western Canal during the irrigation season. And then the rest of the year, there's the 500 cubic feet per second for the Perkins County Canal, except there's no Perkins County Canal, so they don't have to let us have it. At least, certainly, they don't need to let us have it right now under the compact. And so they found out that, looking back for the last 40 or 50 years in terms of stream flows and stuff like that, they decided that there is about between 450 and 500 cubic feet per second that would be available for use in Colorado. And of course, if we had the Perkins County Canal, there wouldn't be 500. There'd be 500 cubic feet per second less during the off season that Nebraska would be entitled to. But so if we had the Perkins County Canal, that would take a big bite out of this 332,000 acre feet of water that could be stored for use in Colorado. Now, this is the proposal coming out of the Denver metro area that got a lot of people in Nebraska excited. And you can see, I hope you can see the South Platte River, flowing out of the Denver metro. You see these orange, big orange circles. Those are proposed storage sites. And then you see the orange lines, one up near the top of the slide, and then the other, sort of in the middle of the slide. And if you look, you can see that funny little black line. And the reason it's funny is because I drew it in there myself. Not being very artistic or whatever, it's not a very straight line, but that's all right. And what it shows is that this plan of the Denver Metro is to divert water as much as they can from the South Platte River before it hits that boundary line or the dividing line between the upper reach, the Denver reach, and the lower reach, which is the Nebraska reach. And so they want to divert as much water as they can, put it in the pipeline, store it in that facility, that orange dot, big orange circle, and then pipe it up the mountains back to the Denver Metro, where it will be used for municipal water purposes. Now, there's also, you see the other orange circle near Julesburg, which is, if you're going on Interstate 80 into Colorado, Julesburg is the first town that you hit across the Nebraska-Colorado border. And so if there's enough money, they'll also take take water out of the lower reach, to make sure that we only get the 100 cubic feet per second during the irrigation season and no more than that. And then that we don't get anything after the irrigation season is finished. And so what they'll do first is try to dry it up in the upper reach so that there's very little water, if any, going from the upper reach down to the lower reach, except when it's legally required to go down. And then if they have money to burn, so to speak, they would build that second pipeline and divert it out of the lower reach, and do the same thing, store it and maybe pipe it back up, maybe use it when they want to dry the river all the way down, they can let 120 CFS out of there so that it supplies the Western Canal. That just gives them some options and some flexibility in terms of what they can do. And these would be very expensive projects, hundreds of millions of dollars, probably over $1 billion, by the time it's finished. And again, this is just a proposal. They're not building pipelines. They're not building any reservoirs. Nothing like that. It's just a proposal, but it's the proposal that got us excited. Okay, so when the water people in the South Platte Basin in Nebraska, the Tri-Basin and the North Platte natural resource districts, when they came and talked to the governor and the people from the Department of Natural Resources talked to the governor, and the Attorney General people talked to the governor, they said, okay, here's what Denver is proposing to do. Here's what we think the impacts would be on flows into Nebraska. The South Platte River flows into a pretty dry part of Nebraska. The eastern, Kearney West for sure is arid, and so water would be missed. And so, the legal folks explained what Nebraska's situation was under the compact, and that it's not real strong position, and so about the only arrow in our quiver is the Perkins County Canal. And so Governor kept says, well, I'm game, and he proposed the $500 million for the canal. Got lots of newspaper headlines both in Nebraska and in Colorado. The Appropriations Committee appropriated about $54 million for planning to get underway. And some of the response in Nebraska has been, $500 million is a lot of money. Are we going to get very much water out of that proposal? And aren't there, we could use that $500 million for other projects in Nebraska that would arguably be more beneficial. And those are all legitimate responses, legitimate comments. But if you're sitting in the governor's chair, he understands, or she, if it's a lady, understands that they're playing a political chess game with Colorado, just like we did, back World War I era, when Colorado said, we're not going to let you have your water. Nebraska says, fine, we'll see you in court. And when the lawsuit is filed, they realized Nebraska was serious, that Nebraska was going to go to court to make them do what they're legally required to do under Colorado law. They said, all right, well, let's work something out. And I think we should look at this $500 million as a similar sort of thing. Colorado says, we're looking at this, we've got this state study about how we're going to dry the river up so that Nebraska just gets the bare minimum that they're legally entitled to under the compact, which includes nothing for the Perkins County Canal, because there is no Perkins County Canal. And Nebraska says, that's fine, well, we'll build the Perkins County Canal. And legally, once Nebraska starts actually taking concrete steps to start building the canal, Colorado has to go to court and stop it, or try to stop it. Because if they don't, if they wait until Nebraska's spent millions of dollars and then said, oh, well, you can't have the water, then the court's going to say, well, you should have said that 6 months ago, before Nebraska spent all this money, and before they dug all these ditches and lined all these canals and everything else. So at some, if Nebraska proceeds, at some point, Colorado will either say, they'll file a lawsuit to try to stop what Nebraska's doing, or they'll say, all right, let's try to negotiate something. And that would, hopefully that's where we end up, but it might be years before we get to that point. And, we're just going to have to wait and see how that all plays out. One thing that hasn't been discussed, and the Colorado probably doesn't want to bring in, is the whooping crane. We have the whooping crane habitat. It's basically the Platte River from basically Kearney to Wood River in general terms. And if any state, Nebraska or Colorado or Wyoming, if any of those states do anything, if they divert water out of the Platte River and that reduces flows to the critical habitat, then the state is obligated to make up those flows to the critical habitat, and that would be an expensive requirement for that Denver project. But that's kind of the South Platte River, and it's been a high profile project or issue in Nebraska for the last couple of years. Excuse me, but we'll just kind of have to wait and see how that all plays out. Okay, the second thing I'd like to talk about is nitrates in drinking water. And the University of Nebraska Med Center in Omaha published some research, right sometime in around between Christmas and New Year's, this last New Year's. And the result of the research that they had done indicated that if kids drink water that is between 5 and 10 parts per million nitrate, which is pretty common in a lot of areas in Nebraska, they could develop pediatric cancers. And up to this point, we thought that the magic number was 10 parts per million, that if it's 10 parts per million or less, then it's safe for everybody. If it's over 10 parts per million, then under the Safe Drinking Water Act, communities have to put in advanced treatment to remove nitrates from the water. People who have their own well, private well, they have to get their water tested. Should, that's the only way they know. And then if they have high nitrates in their water, they can do some. There are some treatment options available for them. We have a new cost share program through the state of Nebraska, where people whose groundwater is 10 parts per million or more can get funding to install some of these home reverse osmosis units. And here's a picture of one. And they fit under your kitchen sink, and your plumber can plumb them. Install it for you, and you can buy them at Sears or Menards or Home Depot or something like that. I guess maybe you don't have Sears anymore, but anyway, they are. The technology is available. The state program would cost share up to $4,000, I believe, to purchase the equipment and to have a licensed plumber, install it in your home. And that's a program that's new this year. I just saw in the paper today that there's a proposal to extend this program, but it's the 10 parts per million and above. That's and I agree that's where we need to start. But I think that in time we may have to start looking at the water that is between 5 and 10 parts per million, and making that sort of financial assistance available to those rural families as well. Okay, here's a map of groundwater quality in Nebraska. I think it's maybe by county or townships or something. Anyway, the gray area is they don't know, but a lot of that is there's not much water except of course in the sand hills. The blue areas are where it's under 5 parts per million. But if you have well water, you should have your water checked every few years, just to make sure that if there are any trends, if it's starting to go up, and you have young kids at home, that you would know that you want to do something. Maybe start drinking bottled water, or get one of these kitchen sink reverse osmosis units or something like that. But so that's the yellow areas, and then the tan areas, and then all the other ones are more than 10 parts per million or more. So it's the yellow areas and the tan, and red and purple. All those are ones. All the ones that not the yellow ones, are places where you can get the state assistance. But you could be in one of the blue areas and you might have high nitrates in your well just because of a neighbor who's a corn farmer, or a neighbor who's got a livestock operation with manure, that could create some additional nitrates that find their way to the part of the aquifer where your well gets the water. So everybody should have everybody that lives in rural Nebraska and is on their own well, not a community well or a rural water system, they should get their water checked, make sure to find out what their nitrate reading is, and then so they can take appropriate action. But as you can see, there's a lot of yellow areas on the map, more yellow areas than the tan areas, or the red or the purple. So it could be that over time we're going to have to these yellow areas are going to be concerns for nitrates as well. And when I started here at the university back in late 1975, I kept reading about all these in the paper about all these little towns that who had nitrates more than 10 parts per million, and so they had to, they were put on administrative order by the state Department of Health, it was called back then, and they had to do things to over time to bring the nitrates in their water down below 10. And I really didn't know, I didn't really understand what it was, but it's that's been an issue. That's an issue in rural Nebraska, not in rural America. It's not limited to Nebraska, but because we have so much irrigation, it's a big issue in Nebraska. But it's something that will be, I think, an issue, a long-term issue. Okay, the other long-term issue is climate change. And gosh, about 10 or so years ago, the federal government came out with an update on the impacts of climate change in the United States. And so that's the one on that's the book on the left. Excuse me. There, I'm sorry. You see this a little better, and they're almost finished. The one on the left is the federal one. And then when the federal one came out, the University of Nebraska, to its credit, came out with pulled the data, the Nebraska data from the national study, and then did did a Nebraska study that said the best information that we have right now. Here's the climate impacts on Nebraska, as we can see it. And they identified some pretty significant ones. Okay, one of the big ones is more hot weather. More hot weather. Right now, we're anywhere from, in most of the state, we're anywhere from 2 to 5 days over 100 degrees every year. The one exception is McCook in southwestern Nebraska. But, Grand Island, McCook, Scottsbluff, those are all pretty low humidity areas, so the heat is not as bad as it is when it's humid. But, so we're talking somewhere between 2 to 10 or 11 days, but most of the state being 5 days or less over 100 degrees. And that's the long-term average. Okay, we're going to skip the low emission scenario because that's for low greenhouse gas emissions, and we're not on the low emission line. We're on the high emission line in the United States and globally, of course. So, we haven't really, we haven't started to bend the curve yet. COVID did, but the emissions bounced back up when things got back to normal more. So now we're looking at going from 2 to 5 days for most of the state, 10 days at the most. Now we're looking at 3 to 4 weeks of 100-degree days, 3 to 4 weeks. So that's that's basically August, or half of July and half of August, something like that. McCook will be 5 weeks, but they're so that's pretty significant increase in the number of hot days. And if you're a cattle producer, all cows spend all their time outside, and so those hot days are tough on cattle, and so they'll need shade and extra water and stuff like that to cope with that very, very hot weather. Okay, when it's really hot in Nebraska, it's almost always pretty dry, and the main water projection that the UNL study made, and I understand that you're having somebody come and talk about climate, so I hope this gives you ideas for questions to ask them, because there's an update of that original study, UNL study that was done 10 years ago. So there's an update that will be published, I think, at the end of this year. And so it'll be very interesting to see if anything has changed from what it was before. But anyway, so I mean, they're the climatologists, they're the experts, so they will know better than I do. They're scientists, and I'm a lawyer who was an English major in college, so I'm not a scientist. But the projections that they made is that we would get more of our precipitation in the spring and less precipitation during the summer. In fact, we had this very hot year. I can't remember what year it was, 2015 or 2016 or 2012, I think. 2012 was when it was. And that was and I think the first UNL climate study was like 2013 published, so it was published like a year after. But one of the statements that Don Wilhite, who led the study and coordinated work among the different scientists who were involved, said, basically, we think that sometime in between 2040 and 2050, that we're going to be having the summer of 2012 every year. And I don't know if, that's 10 years ago or almost 10 years ago. It's not summer yet, but it was pretty bad. I mean, Lincoln was within a week of going to its, shutting everything, any outdoor water use down. Can't wash your cars, nobody can run your garden, your flowers in your garden are all going to have to die unless you have a rain barrel, something like that you can water them with. They were about to hit their highest level in terms of their water emergency. It was really, really bad, and everybody's lawn died. A lot of people lost shrubs and bushes. One of my UNL buddies was on the grounds crew that headed up the East Campus grounds crew, and he lost a lot of his bushes in his yard. So I didn't feel so bad that we lost ours too. We lost a tree. It was just really, really dry, really, really hot, and it was, when you went outside, you felt like you were in an oven. It was pretty uncomfortable, and so, that puts stress on municipal water systems because when it doesn't rain, if you let people water their lawn, many people are going to water their lawn every day. They're going to water their trees and their shrubs and their flowers and their gardens. They have a garden. They're going to water those every day because it's so hot. So at some point you're going to have to cut that off because you've got to maintain enough water pressure so that when people turn the faucet on, water comes out. And if you're out in the country, the irrigators are going. If it's like 2012, they turn their irrigation wells on, roughly around the 1st of June, and will pump all the way into, to basically the 1st of October. And 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 3 months, and maybe a little earlier and a little later on each end. And so that's going to drive groundwater levels down with all that heavy irrigation pumping. And if you're living out of the country and you've got, center pivots on 2 or 3 or 4 sides of your farm, that water level is going to drop. And unless you have a very deep domestic well, your domestic well is going to stop pumping water. And, it's going to be kind of an emergency deal for you. And so, if that becomes an every summer or a mostly every summer occurrence, we'll see some big changes in Nebraska, throughout Nebraska. People won't be able to water their lawns, and they'll look at other options. Here's a rain barrel. I referred to them a little bit earlier. Basically, the rain barrel, it's when it rains, it comes down spout and into the barrel, and you can use the water from the barrel, probably, unless you can't, it's not enough to water your lawn, but you can water your flowers, you can water your garden, you can water your trees if you want. if you want to, all the, whatever you dip the water out of. But that is certainly one option and one way to cope with these hot, dry summers to a limited extent. There are systems that will allow you to take rainwater, that comes off the roof and into your downspouts, and take that in and store it in a tank in the basement, and run it through a little bit of treatment, and that you can use that for some of your indoor water use. I don't know whether it works for drinking water. Probably does if you go with the deluxe version, but that is an option, and an option that people will have to consider, and that we'll have to consider in Nebraska. Here's a system from Southern California, I think San Jose, Santa Clara regional wastewater facility. Long story short, what they're doing is they're taking their sewage effluent, the water that goes through the sewage treatment plant. When we flush the toilets, it all ends up in the municipal sewage treatment plant, where they goes to primary, secondary treatment, but then it goes to advanced water treatment. And ultimately, what many communities are doing in the Southwest, in Florida, actually, of all places, and in California, where they are water short, they are using that cleaned up sewage effluent as drinking water. And sometimes they'll use it directly, sometimes they'll use it as groundwater recharge to recharge municipal well fields. And so there's some additional filtration that occurs, when the effluent goes through that. Here is an aerial shot of one of these facilities in Florida, and it looks just like a water treatment system. You've got the little aeration ponds. You see the circles with the thing going through them. You've got all the tanks and stuff. They probably have a few more tanks or some more stuff in their buildings, where the water gets a little bit more treatment, or a lot more treatment than it would just with primary and secondary treatment, which unless you have nitrates, then you have to have some kind of a tertiary or advanced water treatment to deal with that. So this is part of our water future in Nebraska, and it's got some challenges, and it's going to be tough. Well, challenges ahead, and I hope that we're going into the future with our eyes open, and hopefully these reports from the university about climate impacts in Nebraska can be useful resources in helping to get our eyes open and get us to start thinking about, okay, here's some of the challenges. How are we going to cope with that? Okay, I will stop for now, and it looks like we have some time for questions.
We have a few questions here. As an attorney, do you think there will be equitable considerations available to Colorado, like latches, etc., because we did nothing to build the canal for 100 years?
If this thing ended up in court, I don't think Nebraska has a legal lock on saying, well, if we build the Perkins County Canal, then we get that 500 cubic feet per second out of the compact. We can make the argument, but Colorado water lawyers are some of the best in the world, and they will be very aggressive in challenging that. And the argument that we've waited too long to do anything, and that Colorado is entitled to rely on our inaction to go ahead and do something, I think it's a powerful argument. And if I were a betting man, I'd say that I think that would likely prevail, even though that's the and that may be the Colorado strategy. Once they're ready to go, once we start doing something, stop us, take us to court, and say, and go at it. But yes, I think the latches argument, which is basically the same argument that that we could use against Colorado, that Colorado let us build the canal, and then they took us to court and said, well, you don't get the 500 cubic feet per second because you waited too long to build a canal. Then we would have that on our side, because we'd say, well, if you really felt that way, you should have said that before we spent all the money. But now we spent all the money, so we get the water. And but they're too smart to let us do that. So.
Hey, another question. Do they look at the phosphorus in the water as well?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
That's a good question. Hopefully when you get some water quality people there, that'd be a great question for them, especially Dan Snow from the water lab. He's he's the one who knows.
Yeah, he did a program for us last month that will be up on our website. We recorded it, so people might want to take a look at that. Okay, is there any data on the endocrine disruptors as a result of the chemicals in the water affected by the chlorine, bromine, and fluoride in the water that mimics thyroid hormones?
See my previous answer. I'm not a physician, or I'm not in the health effect business. It's a great question. There's a lot of stuff that's in the water that from a public health perspective should not be in the water. But
and do you have any insight on where people could find that information? Or
again, I would point back to Dan Snow and the Water Sciences Lab as a good resource for that information. I would say it depends on your community and the other water quality issues you're facing.
Okay. And are there any of the water reclamation facilities being planned in Nebraska?
Not to my knowledge. They're doing it in California. They've done it for a long time, and they're looking at doing it on a larger scale because of their drought problems that they've had. But you could argue that taking the sewage water and then cleaning it up so that it meets drinking water standards, and then running that through your public water supply, that is a type of reclamation. But I assume that, are you talking about desalinization, or just this cleaning up the sewage effluent and then using that as a source of municipal water supply, or personal water supply actually as well?
Yeah, it's a question from Sharon. I don't know if she wants to elaborate. What I'll do here for a minute is we have a little poll. If you wouldn't mind just answering these questions real quickly, it helps us with our planning and future funding. So we appreciate it if participants can respond to that. I'll leave this up for a couple minutes. Thank you so much, both Ann and Dave. This has been a really excellent program, and Nebraska Water Center has had so many resources and has helped us so much with our public education efforts. So we really appreciate that. And I think you mentioned, Ann, April 11th is the one on climate change and water.
Yes. Yep. That'll be our next series in this session.
Okay. Okay. I've got another question here. If they considered bio-waste systems using native plants to clean up the water, would be something to look at, called living machines?
Yes, I have seen that. Actually, Dan Snow is involved in research like that. I think using sawdust to remove nitrates in groundwater. I have not talked with him about that, and I haven't seen him I haven't seen a presentation where he has talked about it. To see how they, how do they get the sawdust into the ground to clean up the nitrates or whatever. But this is being looked at in a lot of different agricultural contexts. He started doing it with groundwater. Up to this point, it's mainly been surface water where they, the water runs off the field and then it goes into a big pit or a trench where they put, where they have all the organic material in it, and they call it a bioreactor. And this is supposed to, and this removes nitrates from and phosphorus, basically nutrients from the field runoff before it flows into the stream. And if you want to find out more about that, just Google bioreactors and you'll find it. You'll come across it probably pretty quick. But it's, I don't know if that's being used in Nebraska, but it's certainly a strategy that we'll have to consider in the future.
Maybe Lasagna created using wetland design, marshes, bogs, etc.
Right.
I guess that's, yeah, okay. Hey, are there any other? I think we've addressed all of the questions, unless somebody wants to put something in real quick. This was a real informative program, and we appreciate your taking the time to help us out with our public education.
Yeah, no,
And
you're
an instructor at UNL, is that correct? I see East Campus, I think, behind you, or yeah.
That's right. That's right. I'm in the same building as the ice cream store, so.
Oh, good.